Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Crosby Kemper. I'm the director of the Kansas City Public Library, and we're very glad to have you here to listen to Jeff Benedict talk about his great book, The Little Pink House. I do want to say at the beginning that you can find these flyers out on the table outside for a film, Begging for Billionaires, website www.beggingforbillionaires.com, which is actually a film about five Missouri families, five Missouri cases of eminent domain, and the Institute for Justice, where Dave Rowland worked, and which is responsible for a lot of the Kelo case. You'll hear about that, I'm sure, from Jeff. Found that Missouri is one of the worst states in the United States in terms of eminent domain abuse. And this film, Begging for Billionaires, is screening at the Kansas International Film Festival on Saturday, September 19th. That would be this Saturday at the Glenwood Theater at 95th and Metcalf. So those of you who are interested in this, and you wouldn't be here if you weren't interested, you might want to go take a look at the movie. And we have Begging for Billionaires t-shirt here. And I do want to say at the outset, this has a parochial concern for the library, and maybe in one way, because of the way our politics works, maybe this isn't so parochial. Maybe you all would be interested in this. Kansas City, indeed the library district, which is also the boundaries, except now for part of Independence, of the Kansas City School District. In our district, we are the center of government-controlled, voter-ignored tax abatement in the United States. We have a thing called TIF. You read about TIF in the newspapers periodically, in the Kansas City Star periodically. The Star's starting to be on our side on this issue, by the way, which is extraordinary. But you voted, the voters of the city, of our district, voted us, as you have voted the school district in other ways, and the county, and the mental health levy, and various others. A slight digression. Do you know that Missouri has more political subdivisions per capita than any other state in the United States? It's true. We have a third of all the political subdivisions in the United States are in the state of Missouri. Think about that for a while. More taxing jurisdictions, and you know what that means? More taxes. Anyway, I'm starting to get editorial now, but wait for just a second, because I'm going to be really editorial for a second. And that is to talk about tax abatement. We have a TIF statute in the state of Missouri and a lot of other statutes. We have the following forms of tax abatement that can be controlled by the city council and can take money that was voted by you, the voters, to the library, to the school district, to the county, to the mental health levy, etc. TIF, Chapter 353, Chapter 100, PIEA, Planned Industrial Expansion, LCRA, land clearance for redevelopment. Notice the word developments in a lot of these. TIF is controlled by the Economic Development Corporation. Members are appointed by the mayor and then fall asleep after they're appointed by the mayor, and let the staff do the following. Staff, by the way, of the TIF Commission and the EDC are paid by developer fees. They're paid by developer fees. They're not paid by the city. They're paid by the fees they generate by recommending development projects. And consequently, what happens is we have more of this in Kansas City, Missouri, in the center of Kansas City, Missouri, from the river to 79th Street, our boundaries, than anywhere else in the state of Missouri. And as far as I can find out from talking to other librarians, any other library district in the United States. At the moment, $3 million a year, annually, we have a $16 million budget, goes from our budget, from our tax take, from our taxes, voted by you, into developers' hands. And this is not a process that the voters have approved. This is a state law passed in the state legislature, which gives complete control to the city council, basically, of what the rules for this are, how it operates, so that, for instance, we're a member of the TIF Commission. It's nice that they let us be a member of the TIF Commission, and yet we can't. We're told by the TIF staff when we ask for an accounting on a particular TIF project that we would have to go through the Sunshine Law and make a request under the Sunshine Law for this information from a commission staff, of which we were a member of the commission, and that we'd have to pay for the copying, et cetera, et cetera. So, and so what are they? What kind of projects are these? Well, I'll tell you about the two latest projects. Latest project, it's a PIEA project, They want to move a law firm. I won't name the law firm, but it's one of the larger tenants in the Commerce Tower today, a not tax-advantaged building, by the way. They want to move this law firm, very large law firm, 5 blocks into a new building that will be tax-abated in the city market. Now, what's the economic development rationale for that? Well, there's none. Law firm moving 5 blocks, I don't see that an increase there. Is there blight removal? No, actually the property, which is valued currently, and we're receiving taxes on it, and the school district, et cetera, at $1.3 million, just sold for $2.6 million to the developer. So I don't think there's a blight, it's also an empty lot, a blight removal aspect. So what's the public purpose of this? As far as I can tell, the public purpose of this is to pay some development lawyers some money, and to pay the development staff, the EDC, the money that they get from these fees. This is what's going on in Kansas City, and there's a huge amount. As I said, $3 million of our money every year goes into the developer pockets, $30 million of the school district's money. We're the largest in percentage terms because we're 85% property tax funded. The school district is the largest in dollar terms because they're 40%, it's 40% of their revenue. They're, of course, much larger than we are. And if you see the school district scrambling to pay teachers, scrambling to renovate their buildings, et cetera, you'll understand $30 million has gone into projects like the one I just described. I could go on about the projects and the quality of the projects and the fact that almost no project I've seen in my 4.5 years as library director has got real economic development attached to it. So my whole point here, besides stirring you up to march on City Hall, is that this, whoops, and City Councilwoman Sharon Sanders Brooks, the library's friend who's on the right side of this issue, is sitting there in the second row. She would be happy to have you in her office. And I do want to say Sharon has been on our side on this issue, absolutely on our side. She's been one of the 3 or 4 members of the council who stood up and said we need to have real rules that guide this towards real economic development, towards the parts of the city that really need economic development, and not have the developer of the week club control this. So thank you, Sharon, very much for your support. But my point about all of this is not to tell you about the library's woes. Yes, it is, actually. But my point about this is a real live issue. Eminent domain is a variation on this, where we have allowed, where the government has been allowed by the process, by the courts, by an incredible overreach to take property, to take taxes that have been voted in one direction and redirect that in another direction. There's no question in my mind that this is contrary to the view of the founders, contrary to the view of people who designed the original laws around this at the federal or the state or the local level. And we've had the greed of developers and essentially the salivation of some politicians, not Sharon, whenever the words economic development are uttered, have taken control of our public policy. So this is an important issue for the library. Now, just to mention a couple of upcoming events at the library, so you know we're not just about politics all the time. We do have upcoming couple of major events at the library. We have Sarah Paretsky, the great mystery novelist, and I will be able to tell you when Sarah's coming in 1 second. Sarah Paretsky will be here, and she'll be at the plaza right here on September 24th, Thursday, September 24th, a week from this Thursday here, and she'll be talking about her latest V.I. Warshawski novel. And she's a very interesting person. She's from Lawrence, Kansas originally, too. So she's a local girl who's made good. I also want to mention, because it's received excellent reviews, I haven't read it yet, but Tracy Doherty has written a biography of the great short story writer Donald Barthelme called Hiding Man, and it's going to be a candidate for all the literary awards at the end of this year. And he'll be at the where is he coming? Central Library this Thursday. September 17th. So I want you to know about those two events. I also want you to know that on October 1st, we're going to be revealing some clips, some outtakes, some stories behind the television series that's sweeping the nation, or at least certain parts of the KCPT audience. Meet the Past, which a few of you may have been to some of these. Meet the Past is the show where I interview historical reenactors, historical characters such as Jesse James, Walt Disney, Annie Chambers, Kansas City's Madam, Langston Hughes, Charlie Parker, etc. And KCPT will start airing those on Thursday, October 8th at 8:30 p.m., I think. It's a 13-part series, but we're going to do, on this stage, we're going to do some outtakes and some stories behind the stories, and encourage you to come on October 1st to that. Okay, enough of the future programs. You want to hear Jeff Benedict. And to introduce Jeff Benedict, we've got Dave Rowland of the Show Me Institute. Now, the Show Me Institute is a libertarian public policy, state public policy think tank, headquartered at the moment in Clayton, soon to be in the city of St. Louis, I believe. And I have an involvement with it. I have to disclose. I'm the chairman of the board, actually. I helped found it. And we hire the best economists we can find and other public policy analysts like Dave to do studies of problems in the state of Missouri from a libertarian free market point of view, market-based solutions we like to talk about. So school choice has been a big issue for us. Low, fair, equal tax burden on Missourians is an issue, but eminent domain has become an issue for us. And Dave is a good guy to talk about this because after graduating from Abilene Christian University and getting his law degree in MTS from Vanderbilt, he's gone to work for, among others, the Institute for Justice, where he worked on issues such as eminent domain and Freedom Forum's First Amendment Center, for which he's written a number of essays. He's been quoted in the Wall Street Journal and presented expert testimony about school choice in front of several state legislators, including his report, School Choice in the North Carolina Constitution, which was published in 2006. And he's a policy analyst for the Show Me Institute in St. Louis today, and doing a great job of that. So, Dave, would you introduce Jeff? Thank you.
Thank you, Crosby. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight Mr. Jeff Benedict. Jeff is one of America's top investigative journalists. He is the author of 7 critically acclaimed books, including The Mormon Way of Doing Business, Out of Bounds, Pros and Cons, and Without Reservation. His articles have been published in Sports Illustrated, the LA Times, and the New York Times. And tonight he's here to talk about a fantastic book about a case near and dear to my heart, Kelo versus the City of New London. I think he did a wonderful job, and I hope that you all will give him a big Missouri welcome. Mr. Jeff Benedict.
Good evening, everyone. It's really great to be here, and I'm thankful to the library for bringing me. As a writer, I have a pretty personal affection for libraries. I love the buildings. I love what they promote, and I'm always glad to have the opportunity to visit them and to be with people who like to read books. I think that what I do is the greatest job in America. I'm very grateful to be a writer, and I'm grateful to do nonfiction work. This story, Little Pink House, is a little personal to me because I was born in New London, where this story takes place, and I learned about it the way a lot of people learned about it. I read about it in the news. And when I first read about it, it was just a simple story in our local paper. I lived in the next town over at that time, and it seemed like another typical dispute between homeowners and local government officials. This goes on all over America all the time. I didn't think much of it. It stayed in the news for quite a while as the fight escalated, and I still didn't think much of it. And then eventually a court case started. It got more interesting, and this ends up dragging on for years. And then one day I read that the United States Supreme Court had decided to select this case for review. And it was that day that I thought to myself, wow, this isn't a local story anymore. And this actually could be a book now, because no matter what the Supreme Court decides, it's going to affect the whole country. It's going to be precedent setting. It's going to be important. And that's when I wanted to do it. But I was busy on another project. And so the case went to the Supreme Court. It was argued. It was decided. It was incredibly controversial. I watched the reaction from very close to home, literally next door, and saw how volatile it was and how emotional it was and how passionate it was. And by then I was finishing up with this project, and I was clear to do something. And my fear was that there had been other writers who'd covered this case for a long time, who would be in a position to be well underway on a book, and I thought I might be too late. And one day I got in my car and I drove to Susette Kelo's little pink house. And by that time, the Supreme Court decision was well decided, and it was decided, as you all know, 5-4, that the city had the right to evict these people and condemn their homes and use the power of eminent domain to take property and do something else with it. But the plaintiffs in the lawsuit were still in their houses, even though the court had said many months earlier that they had to get out. And the city wanted them out, and the state wanted them out. They were still there. And it was at that moment that I got in my car and drove to Suzette's house, and I knocked on the front door of this famous house that had been now in the national news. And I had prepared a very well thought out pitch, because I knew I was going to have to deliver this on her doorstep, and I'm either going to get in or I'm not. And if I don't get in and I don't get Susette, I don't get to do the book. It's really that simple. You can't do this book without Kelo. And she came to the door, and she opened it, and I started in, and I said, it's easy to remember what I said because I didn't get too far. I said, hi, my name is Jeff Benedict, and I'm a writer, and I would like to. I got about that far, and she said, I know who you are. And I had never been talked to like that before by someone that I wanted to interview. And so I paused, and then she said, what took you so long? And I thought, I'm in. And I thought, this is great. And she opened the door, and I went in the house. And it was the first time I saw the house from the inside. And she invited me to sit down at her kitchen table. I would soon learn that that kitchen table was an important table in this story. It's where so many of these meetings happened over the course of 6 or 7 years of fighting and litigation. And now I was sitting at that table. And I typically record when I interview people for books, but this wasn't that kind of interview. This was an interview where I'm trying to find out, first of all, will this person cooperate with me? And then second of all, does she have what it takes to deliver me to the finish line as a writer? And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, does she have a good memory? Is she honest? Does she keep a journal or a diary? And if she does, will she let me read it? Is she a saver? Does she have documents and pictures and stuff like that? And would she turn them over to me? Is she a good storyteller? Is she the kind of person when you ask her a question, she goes, yeah? Or is she the kind of person who will tell you something? And so for 3 hours, I sat there that day asking her all kinds of questions which were designed to find that out. And at the end of 3 hours, I was convinced. She had it. She had the story. She had what I need. She would be a great character to build a book around. And so then the question was, I said, you let me in your house here today. The question now is, will you let me in your life? Because for me to do what I want to do, I need to really crawl inside your life for the next couple of years. And I'm going to ask you things that you've probably never been asked, that most people would probably never want to answer. And I said, I don't need to write all that information, but I need to know it all. And she said yes. And I think it was very similar to when she said yes to the Institute for Justice the first time that Scott Bullock interviewed her and asked her if she'd be the lead plaintiff, and explained that she wasn't going to have to pay for their excellent law firm and legal services, but instead of money, what they were going to need is for her to be a spokesman and a leader in something more than just a piece of litigation. And she said yes, fully not comprehending what that would mean in the long run. And that was the case with us. But so we started. And what intrigued me very early was this. I teach advanced writing to college students at Southern Virginia University, and I'm often asked by students, what are the keys to good writing? And I say, well, in my kind of writing, nonfiction writing, where you're doing reporting and research and you're doing a lot of interviewing, I said, I think one of the most important traits of a good writer is that the writer must be a really good listener. And a good listener, not just with his or her ears, but with their eyes. There's a lot to be learned from watching someone's face when they answer questions. And listening is important. And here's one of the things I listened to in the very beginning of the reporting on this book. I was interested in why, Susette, why did you stand up and fight for 8 years when so many people fell out of line? And there was so much money there that you could have taken and left and all these things. And, she kept saying the same thing. I wanted to stay in my house. And then I interviewed the real estate agent that sold her the house. And this is what he told me. He said, honestly, Jeff, he said, I had never sold a house before. This was my first sale. He said, I just got my license. It was a career change. I just got my real estate license, so I'm the poor slob in the office on a Saturday in the summer when the phone rings. And this woman says her name is Susette Kelo, and she'd like to look at the house on 8 East Street in New London. And he said, I honestly didn't even know where that was. And I put her on hold, got the listing sheet, and when I looked at it, I realized this house has been on the market a long time, and there's a reason for that. This house is in rough shape, it looks horrible, it's old, and it's in a neighborhood that there are no yards and no driveways, and, park on the street. And he got back on the phone, when would you like to see it? And she said, today. And he said, well, let me get you some directions. And she said, well, I'm standing out in front of the house right now. And he said, oh, okay, well, I'll meet you there. And here's where it gets good. He said, when I got there, what I noticed was she was bleeding on the top of her feet. And this is what I mean about a journalist who listens. Right away, I thought, wow, what's that about? And he said, well, the house hadn't been occupied for a long time. There was all kinds of heavy, thick brush around it. You couldn't even get to the front door. And he said while she was waiting for me to get there, she'd gotten some hand clippers out of her trunk and started cutting her way in so she could get to the door. And she was wearing, summertime, she's wearing shorts and sandals. So her feet don't have socks on them or anything. And some of these prickers and briars had cut the tops of her feet open. And he said, so when I mentioned to her, excuse me, your feet, he said, didn't even faze her. I want to get in the house. And so I got up there and I unlocked the door, got the padlock off, and he said when I got inside, he said I was immediately embarrassed at the appearance of the house. And he said I immediately went to the basement, and it was even worse. He said there's a big boulder in the middle of the basement, it had dirt floor, and he said it was just, I can't sell her this house. And he said I found everything that was wrong with the house, and then I came back up to talk her out of it. I didn't think about that. Real estate agent trying to talk someone out of buying a house. And he said, but when I got upstairs, she was in the living room, which is the room you enter the house in. And he said she had pulled back the curtains on the window, which looked like they hadn't been open in years. And he said when she did, filled the room up with sunlight, nice view of Long Island Sound and boats and stuff like that. And he said she never left the window. Made an offer on the house right there. Don't you want to see the basement? No, I don't want to see the basement. You want to come upstairs and look at the bedrooms? No. And he gave her an offer. Now, I'll tell you why those two things are important to me. Because one of the first things I was told when I started working on this book from people who didn't like Susette and the other people who fought to save their homes was that these were greedy people. And the reason they held on to their land, especially her, was because they could get more money by holding out longer. He who sells first gets less. And that's what she was all about. And the other thing she was all about was fame, her 15 minutes of glory. you know, getting on the Katie Couric show and People magazine, and that's why she did this. She wanted to be, she liked the spotlight. Well, you know what? That's possible. It might be true. And so when I start out, anything's possible until you know. But when you think about someone who's cutting through with prickers on their feet and standing in the window for 30 minutes while the real estate agent's running around and looking at the water, I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't sound like a woman who's motivated by greed. It sounds like a woman who's motivated by hunger. She's hungry for something that she's never had before, and now she has a chance to get it. And what is it? It's property. It's a home. It's a home you can call your own. And when you're 40-something years old and you've raised 5 kids and you got pregnant when you were 16, that's when it starts, and you've been divorced twice, you haven't had a lot. You've done a lot for other people, raised 5 boys, took care of 2 husbands, and now you find your life, if you look at statistics, your life is halfway behind you. And you've never owned a piece of property in your life. You've never had a house that has a deed with it that carries your name on it. And suddenly it's within your grasp, and this is the place, and you get the place, and you move in. And you don't care that you got to sand the floors and putty the holes and repaint the inside, and you got to do those things because actually that just makes you love the place even more. And Susette wasn't a big diary keeper, but I was able to find a few diary entries, and this was the one that I used in the opening of the book because it was so good. It was her sitting on the front porch of this house after she'd done all those renovations herself, and she finally gets to spend the first night in the house. And she's sitting out on a rocking chair on the front deck of this house in a small urban neighborhood, in a small city, looking out over the water, and she's writing about how it's the happiest day of her life. I mean, she's finally got something that she can call her own. She's all alone. She's divorced again, kids have all moved on, but she's happy and she's content. And then she picks up the newspaper shortly after that and finds out that Pfizer Corporation, Pfizer Inc., the largest pharmaceutical in the United States, is going to build its new global research and development headquarters next door, literally the next block over. And didn't think a whole lot of it, but that's where the story, in my judgment, gets good. And I'll take you to the other side of the story now. As Susette's moving into New London, finding this house, coming out of a divorce, kind of starting life over, getting herself set up, there's another woman in New London who's doing something transformational, and her name is Claire Gaudiani. And she's the president of Connecticut College, which is the most prestigious institution in the city of New London. That and the United States Coast Guard, and they're side by side. And they occupy the 2 most pristine pieces of property in that city. They're on a hill overlooking the Thames River. Connecticut College has always been a little bit distant from the rest of the city. New London's a poor urban area, and there's nothing poor and urban about Connecticut College. It's very elite, it's very private, it's very rich. And Claire was brought in as the new president, female president, first one, and she changes everything because she is raising money like no man has ever done who's sat in the president's seat before. And that's one of the reasons she was brought there. She's very smart, she's politically connected, she's savvy, she's sexy, she's got everything going to be a colossal fundraiser for a school like Connecticut College. And then she did something else that no president had ever done. She managed to breach the gap between this college on a hill and the city, because she went into the city and she made friends with the local educators, with the ministers, with the community activists. She worked with them all, and they loved her because she could be one of them. But they knew she wasn't really one of them. She was really a PhD who was sophisticated and ran in other circles, but when she was around them, she could speak their language, and people liked that, and they liked everything about her. Well, the governor of Connecticut, a guy named John Rowland, sitting up in Hartford, he's a Republican. He's carried Connecticut for 2 consecutive races in a highly democratic state. You know about Connecticut. I'm a native of Connecticut. I mean, we're a pretty liberal state. And here's this Republican governor who's just running away with it. But the one city he's getting his clock cleaned in every time is New London. It's the most democratic city in the state of Connecticut. And he really wanted to make a difference in New London, and he looked at the waterfront and thought, this is where we can make it. They have the highest unemployment rate in the state. They got all this real estate down on the water that nothing's happening with. We need to do a big development scheme down there. And so he has his top political guy say, figure out how to do this. The political guy says, well, I'm going to go out and hire a lobbyist who used to be the Democratic mayor of New London. We'll pay him a whole bunch of money, and he can help us get around City Hall in New London. Okay, well, how are you going to do that? Well, you know, we used to have this thing in New London called the New London Development Corporation. It's a nonprofit organization. It's chartered, and it was set up to do development in the city. You know, it's been dormant since the 70s, but it's still on the books. All we have to do is activate it with a simple filing at the Secretary of State's office. And then we can use that vehicle to do your development scheme, and we can cut the Democratic City Hall right out of the picture. Oh, I like that. But who are we going to get to run this thing? Well, that's where Claire comes in. We got this person down here, the president of the college. She's making things happen. She can do it. She'd be perfect. Governor, chief of staff meets with her, comes back and tells the governor, I love these words, I want that woman. She gets the job. So now she's the president of the college, and she's the president of the New London Development Corporation. This is someone who's never developed a garage, who's now going to be handed the purse from the governor's office to do a wholesale waterfront redevelopment in an urban area. She's smart, though, and she says, you know, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it big. And I don't know how to do this, but I know the people who do know how to do this. And she picks up the phone, and she calls the president of Pfizer. Now, why does she call that guy? Well, for two reasons. Number one, Pfizer at the time had its big research facility across the river from New London in a town called Groton, and it was no secret that they'd outgrown the space. And they were actually looking all over the world for a new headquarters. That was common knowledge. She knows the guy personally because he's on the board at Connecticut College. See what I mean about these connections? I mean, Claire knows everybody. So she can actually just pick the phone up at her house and call his house at 7 o'clock in the evening and get him on the phone and get a meeting a couple mornings later in his office at 7 o'clock. What do you want to talk about? Well, I want to talk about this new thing I'm doing. And she explains it. She says, we need someone like you, a corporate guy, Fortune 500 company that knows how to, what would it take to attract a company like you to New London? We have a 24-acre piece of property right on the water. It used to be a linoleum factory. It's totally polluted and contaminated, oil in the ground, all kinds of stuff. That's where we're going to start. We need to put a big company there, and then it'll get a lot easier to just start going from there. It's like doing a mall and starting with Macy's. You get them on board, and then you get everybody else to come in. Will you, would Pfizer be in? No, Pfizer's not interested. Okay, well, you know, that's okay. So she throws him the wiffle ball. He doesn't swing. Well, here's, you know, what I really like is, would you join our board? Well, no, I won't. And what he didn't tell her, but it's important to the story of Little Pink House, is not only was he on the fast track to build the global headquarters for Pfizer, but he's in charge of R&D, and Pfizer's just found this drug that nobody knows about yet, but the whole world is going to know about it because it helps men with impotency. And they've just filed their application with the FDA. It's a fast track application. And guess who's in charge of it? The guy she's sitting across the room from. He's got a lot on his plate right now, and joining some local nonprofit kind of development, whatever that thing is, I don't have time for that. She says, listen, I don't have time for it either. I'm busy too. And so are all the other board people. We're all busy. And I love these words. But we're the kind of people who can do this. We're the kind of people who can do this. Says, what's the commitment? She says, I've asked everybody for a year, and if we don't do something big in a year, we'll just shut the whole thing down. He said, I'll give you 6 months. He comes to the first board meeting, and that's the night they nominate officers, and he gets nominated to chair the Real Estate Acquisition Committee that night. So she takes him over to the 24-acre lot to show him where they're going to get started, and when he looks at it, he says, whoa, we got a real problem here. First of all, this place smells like a toilet bowl. Well, that's because there's actually a sewer plant next door and it's not capped or anything. And of course, nobody cares about that when you got all these poor, middle-class folks living next door. It doesn't really matter. They've been complaining about it for decades, but who cares about them? Well, it's going to matter next door to you can't bring a company in here that's smelling that all day long. And what about this other property next door that's got the big chain link fence around it with all the rubber tires and looks like machines and oil and junk? Well, that's actually a scrap metal yard. They've been there a long time. It's kind of polluted and everything else. And then this, well, that's the old fort that Benedict Arnold burned down. Kind of looks like no one's done anything with it since. And it's just sitting there, this big, ugly, gray edifice. You want a Fortune 500 company to come here, surrounded by those three properties, and take a 24-acre lot that's polluted and contaminated? No one's going to come here. And Claire's genius is, well, what if the governor was willing to pay all the cost to decontaminate the site? In other words, truck all that soil out of here and bring in truckload after truckload of new soil, completely clean it up, and then give it to you for $1. 24 acres of remediated waterfront property on Long Island Sound. How about that? Well, yeah, I mean, that would help, obviously. And what if the governor was willing to buy out the junkyard guy, 7 acres, just buy him out, clean his property, and then give it to you, along with the 24? How about that? That'd be good. And, what if you took the fort and completely renovated it and turned it into a tourist site, a state park, with public parking and waterfront access, and the state paid for that? That would help. And then the sewer thing. Well, what if we just modernized it like most sewers, and we put caps on it and took care of the odor and made it look nice and dressed it up, and away goes the odor? What if we did all that? Well, then, maybe we have something to talk about. And before long, Claire Gaudiani and the president of Pfizer are sitting in the governor's office with an audience of one. And they make their pitch, and the governor makes his pitch, and confidential memos are exchanged, and then there's this terrific memo. You'll love this stuff when you're a journalist, is that you get a memo like this. It's a confidential memo that goes to the governor, and it's the demands, the requirements that Pfizer has, their board in New York, to go to New London. So they're going to get all that stuff that I just told you about, but there's one other thing we want before we say yes, and that is there's 90 acres around this area, abutting properties. That's a mishmash of industrial zone property, commercial zone property, and residential. Well, we'd like all of that changed. We don't want to own it. We don't want you to give it to us. But we'd like the city or the state to acquire it and kind of get the eraser out and erase what's there. And we want you to build new things. And actually, we have some specifics. Here's what they are. Number one, we want a 5-star high-rise hotel. And we will guarantee 50% occupancy in that hotel. Number two, we want a health club and spa, a 5-star. We want new upscale housing that scientists and doctors and those kind of people like to live in permanently. If they're coming to be employees of ours, or visiting scholars who sometimes come here. And then we also would like some biomedical research space, for new companies, small companies, startups that are in the medical field. And so we've kind of got these drawings the architect did here. And if the state can promise that, then we're in. And then the governor writes a letter back and says yes. And that leads to the announcement, that leads to the newspaper story that prompts Susette to pick up her phone and call the new mayor, a guy named Lloyd Beachy, who looks a lot like Jacques Cousteau and who's not a good politician because he's a really humble, nice man who had no interest in becoming political, But so many people liked him that they encouraged him, you should really run for local office. You care about the community. And so he did, and he won. And he got sworn in just 2 months after Susette moved into the Pink House, and 3 months before Pfizer announced it was coming to New London. He gets sworn in. And one of his first acts as the new mayor is to get a phone call from the real power in town, Claire. She invites the mayor to come up to the campus and visit her in the mansion and discuss their future vision of New London. And when he gets there, he goes in the kitchen, and she says, would you like a cup of coffee? He said, yes, I would. And he said to me, he said, you know, I realized she didn't live in the president's mansion because she couldn't find a cup. But ultimately, we were able to make some coffee, and we sat, and while she was fussing around trying to figure that out, he said, I was sitting there, and I saw this easel she had in the room, and it had a big poster on it. And he said, I'm looking at this picture, and he says, man, that thing looks familiar to me, but I can't place what I'm looking at. It actually kind of looks like New London. But that's not New London, because we don't have any high-rises like that in New London. We don't have hotels like that in New London. And then he realized that the geographical contours of it was Fort Trumbull, Susette's neighborhood. And he's, you know, it's kind of one of these things like, am I looking at that thing right? And then she sits down and they start talking about it. Well, that's our vision for New London. And he's focused on the monogram at the bottom. Who drew this? And the architectural firm is employed by Pfizer. And he started thinking, what's going on here? You know, that's his start. So when Susette calls him a few months later and she says, I saw this thing in the paper, Pfizer. Should I be concerned about that? And the mayor says, yes, you should, Ms. Kelo. And shortly after that, he's in Ms. Kelo's house. He's sitting at the same table I sat at the first time I went there. And he brings a woman with her, overweight, chain smoking, not very attractive, raspy voice, talks like she's been in a lot of fights. And she's a community organizer. She comes in with the mayor, and they sit down together. And they're going to help Ms. Kelo figure out how she's going to save her house. She says, what do I have to do? And the mayor says, well, I'll tell you what you have to do. Number one, you need to form a local community organization. And then you need to go to every one of those people in your neighborhood, clipboard in hand, and you've got to get every one of them to sign a petition stating why they don't want to leave their homes. And after you do that, you need to bring those petitions to us. The mayor and the city council, you need to present them in a public forum where we can review them and the public can hear you. He says, then you need to go to your state legislator and you need to get them involved in this, and you need to start writing letters to the editor. And that's about the time Susette stopped and said, hold on a second here. You know, I came here to be alone and to start my life over. And I don't want to, I don't know how to do any of this stuff, and I really don't want it. I don't know how to do that. And he says, do you want to keep your house? And she said, well, yeah, I want to keep my house. Then you go door to door, and she will help you. And that's where Kathleen comes in, the community activist who pairs up with Susette, and they start doing all those things. And they do all those things for over 2 years. And they prevent what is ultimately going to be the inevitable. And there comes a point where they realize you can't stop City Hall. And that day comes when the mayor and some other activists who were on the side of the homeowners were leaving a prayer circle just outside Fort Trumbull one morning, and as the mayor and his wife were driving through Susette's neighborhood, they saw a bulldozer parked on East Street, motor running, big guy named Chico Barbieri in the seat, cut off sleeves, arms as big as my legs, tough guy, Italian, sitting on the machine, ready to take a bite out of a house. And that's because the New London Development Corporation had scared enough people, mostly elderly, senior citizens who had no money and certainly no gumption to fight at age 85 what everyone was telling them can't be beaten. So they had sold and moved out. And now the city and the Development Corporation had title to those homes, and they were exercising their right as property owners to knock those houses down. And it wasn't because they could start development. They couldn't start development because there was all these other houses they didn't own. This was about sending a message. Today is Message Day. We are going to rip some houses down in the middle of a working day with families and people going to work and going to school, running around. We're going to let everybody know this is the future. You might as well give up. And when the mayor's wife saw that bulldozer on that house, she said to her husband, she calls him Beach, instead of Beachy. She said, Beach, stop the car. I've had enough. You go home and you get my crochet and my needle and bring it back to me so that I can keep my hands under control. But I'm going to go sit on that door in front of that machine and I am not going to move. And she does. And the mayor runs home. He lives 5 minutes away. And he is furious because one of the things he'd done in City Hall was he told the guys who handle the permits, if you get a demolition permit from the New London Development Corporation, I want to know about it. So by the time he gets back there 10 minutes later, he's ready to take somebody apart. And when he gets out of the car, he sees the guy with the hard hat on, and then next to him is one of the permit guys from the City Hall. And he goes by him, and he puts his finger right in his face, and he says, damn you, as he walks by and passes the machine and sits next to his wife and plants himself. And then Kathleen Mitchell, that community organizer, she's on the street with a lot of the homeowners, and she crosses the line and sits down. And now Chico in the machine pulls out his phone, shuts the machine off, and he calls the police. And he says, I got a guy sitting on the front steps, a couple of women. Police get in their cars, they don't know who it is, they drive down there, they're ready to do what policemen do, and they get out of the car, and it's the mayor who employs them. And they're going, you got to be kidding me. So they go up to the front, and they said, Lloyd, hey, Lloyd, come on. These guys, you got to come off the steps. He said, nope, we're not coming off the steps. Lloyd, these guys have a permit. It's legal. He said, I don't care. You know what? This is not about whether it's legal or not. It's about whether it's right. And this isn't right. And we're not moving. Lloyd, if you don't come off the steps, then we have to arrest you in front of all these people. Well, and I guess you better arrest us. And they get the cuffs out, and they arrest the mayor. And they pick him up like a little animal. And they cart him to the police car. And then they cuff his wife, and they cart her to the police car. And then they get to Kathleen, and she says, I'll walk. And she gets up and gets in the car. Now, you're Susette, and you're all these neighbors. You're a 75-year-old woman on oxygen who's never lived anywhere else, and you live 2 doors down, and you're watching this. And a house that took probably a year to build and is over 100 years old is demolished in less than 10 minutes, reduced to a pile of sticks, bricks, mortar, and dust. And then you move to the next one, and you rip it down. And you come right down the street, and you tear down every single house that the New London Development Corporation owns until you get to the one that's right next to Susette's. And she then gets hysterical. She grabs her broom, which is useless, and she runs out and starts trying to fend off the machine. This time, he's not stopping. We've already done that drill. The police have already been down here. I'm taking that house down. He bites into that house. Glass starts flying. It flies in her face. It flies in her hair. Guys are on the side of the road yelling, screaming, come on, Susette, you got to get down. She can't hear because the machine's too high. And the fire marshal's sitting there going, cut the machine, cut the machine. And finally, he stops the machine. And a guy named Billy Von Winkle, who's Susette's neighbor, who's will become one of the key plaintiffs in the case, he grabs her off the porch and he says, Susette, come on, you got to get off. And he throws her in the car, and he takes a woman who doesn't drink, in fact, hasn't drank since the day her 17-year-old son was hit by a drunk driver, which is why she became a medic, because they saved his life. So she's got a big problem with drinking, but not that night. Billy takes her down to the bar and gets her drunk, and she comes home that night and goes to bed. And when she wakes up in the morning and looks out the side of the pink house, there's nothing to look at. Nothing. It's gone. And then There's a knock at the door, and it's Chico Barbieri, the guy who knocked it down. Big guy, strapping guy standing there with what else but a basket of scented soaps. And he hands it to Susette, and he says, I promise I will never knock your house down. Because I've never went through something like that. And she brings him in the house, and this tells you something about her character. And I got this from him. He said she put her arms around me, and I put mine around her. And she offered me a cup of coffee, and that's when we became friends. I mean, Little Pink House, I don't have time to tell you the whole story, but it is a terrific human account. And I don't say that because I wrote it. This is about the people and what they did. The Institute for Justice took this case because it was a no-hope situation for these people. And they won their case in trial in New London. This case goes to trial and they win. The case that thought could not be won. And then it was appealed to the Connecticut Supreme Court. It was reversed by one vote. And then it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, nobody could believe, after Sandra Day O'Connor asked this critical question to Wesley Horton, the lawyer who represented the city in the Supreme Court, she asked him a very simple question. And it was, if there was a Motel 6 and Ritz-Carlton came along and said they wanted to build their hotel where Motel 6 is, can the city take Motel 6's property away and give it to the Ritz-Carlton? Why, yes. A quick response. Why was it so quick? Well, because they'd rehearsed this question. Because this was the one question that the lawyers for the city, when they did their mock trials at Georgetown and Yale and these other law schools getting ready for this hearing, this was the question that tripped them every time. When the judges would ask them that question, the first time they said, well, no, of course not. I mean, that sounds adulterous. It's hideous. No. And then when they conferenced after, the other lawyer says, yeah, but if you say no to that, we can't justify what we're doing here. I mean, this doesn't work. Because then the next question is going to be, well, then where do you draw the line? And he said, the other guy says, well, the only way to answer that is you just got to say yes. And then move on, or else we're going to spend 30 minutes of oral argument fighting about that question. So as soon as O'Connor asked it, Horton answered it. And as soon as Horton answered it, Scott Bullock, the lawyer for the Institute for Justice, thought, we won! I mean, if that's the argument, well, there's no way we can lose. This is unbelievable. And in fact, Scalia was sitting there and he said, let me get this straight. Are you saying, it's this simple, you look at the transcript, are you saying you can take from A and give to B if B can pay more taxes than A? And Horton said, well, if it's considerably more taxes, yes. And Scalia said, okay, meaning not that I accept that, but I think I understand where you're going. Now we can move on. And that's where they lost O'Connor. O'Connor had written the previous eminent domain opinion that everybody thought she'd be on the side of the city in this case. She flipped, and she ended up writing the dissent, which has carried the day. It is a far more memorable opinion than the majority opinion. It's the thing that everybody remembers. And it's the last thing she wrote before she retired. She went out with a bang. And the homeowners lose, and a year later they're still in our homes. And I'll end with this, because I thought it was profound. A year after this, you're still in your home. And the governor, new governor, because the governor who was behind this plan is in prison. And so he's in prison. His chief of staff is in prison. Claire, the president of all this, has been unbelievably fired from Connecticut College because over 70% of the tenured faculty circulate a petition demanding that she be fired. And the president of Pfizer is no longer with Pfizer. So the four pillars of power who brought this thing to bear are gone. The only one left standing is the divorced nurse in the Little Pink House. And the new governor dispatches an emissary down there and says, you have an open checkbook. Get these people out of their homes without a public mess. And all the other people have now taken the money and run except her. And the governor has now issued an ultimatum through the emissary, and the ultimatum is this: the money is on the table until midnight tonight. And after tonight, the money's off the table, and you are left to your own devices with the City of New London, be that as it may. So Fox News and Sean Hannity send a truck down there, and they put Susette on national television that night at about 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 3 hours before the deadline. I'm there because I'm reporting now. I'm writing the story now, so I'm in the background watching. And Sean Hannity asked her, Ms. Kelo, what are you going to do at midnight? And her answer is the same as it's always been: I want to stay in my house. Well, we'll be watching, Ms. Kelo, and then boom, the interview's over, lights go off, go on to the next story, they take the lights down. The guys who are operating the local truck, they're taking all their equipment down, they walk to Susette to take her microphone off, and they shake her hand and they say, Ms. Kelo, we're with you. We're with you. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, no, you're not. No, you're not. That's like the guy who's, 6 rows back in the Army who's sending bullets up to the guy in the front, saying, keep firing, we're with you. You're not with her. And so they get in the truck and they drive off, and now there's nobody there, and it's dark as dark can be. It's a foggy, humid New England night. And here she is standing out in front of this pink house by herself, but for a reporter. And I walk her to the door of her house. She goes up the steps, and she stops, and she turns around, and she says, Jeff, what do you think I should do? And I said, I don't know if there's any journalists in the room. I said, Susette, I can't answer that, because I'm here to write what you do and watch and observe. It's not my place to advise. And she said, yeah, but what do you think I should do? And you get to know Susette. Susette didn't hang around for 8 years because she's not persistent. And I said, well, Susette, I'm not going to tell you what I think you should do, but I'll tell you what I think. And what I think is the governor doesn't have the backbone or the stomach to watch you get dragged out of your house by marshals as cameras roll from the NBC Nightly News and Fox and ABC and the New York Times and everybody else. She doesn't have the stomach for that. And if push comes to shove, that won't happen. I think if you want to stay in your house, you can stay here until you die. If you wake up tomorrow and decide you're not going, I don't think you're going. But the other thing, I think, is you look around. Everything you wanted is gone. These neighbors, these people who became like family to you after you lost your family, they're not here anymore. And in a few weeks, those houses are going to be piles of dirt. So the question is, do you want to stay? And then I went home, said goodnight to my kids, and I tucked myself in my very comfortable bed in my nice home in the next town over that doesn't have a problem with eminent domain. And then I got up in the morning and I called Susette and I said, what are you doing? And that was the day they struck the deal that was handled by the Institute for Justice. It saved the pink house. It was the only house in 90 acres that was saved from the wrecking ball. It's the only one standing today. It's in another part of town. It was taken down board by board and reconstructed board by board. In another part of New London, it's now a public landmark that anybody can go to. She doesn't live there anymore. She lives in Groton, across the way. She received, I think, a good sum of money, which she used to buy a house that was similar to the one she had. And she became the poster child for eminent domain. And she's gone all over the country talking about it. It was a privilege and an honor to write about her and everybody else in the story, including Claire and the people on the other side. I found them fascinating and compelling. It was a terrific story, and it's made a huge impact on public policy and eminent domain in every state in the country. I thank you, and I'd be happy to take a couple questions.
Do you think that there'll be another case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court on eminent domain?
Well, I mean, eventually there could be, I guess. They don't take a lot of eminent domain cases. And look, I'll tell you right now, there's probably people in this room who are much more scholarly about the Supreme Court than I am. I don't profess to be. But I do know that, you don't hear a lot of eminent domain cases before the court. It's been a settled area of law for a long time. And who knows? But I would say this, that I think if the case came back today, it would go exactly the same way, 5-4.
I have a question and a follow-up question.
Okay.
What's the status of the Pfizer project right now?
Well, the Pfizer project was completed well before the litigation was completed. They were in the building and fully operating, and they still are today.
How about the surrounding area?
Yeah, the surrounding area, the 90 acres that was targeted, is 90 acres of a dirt bowl right now. There's not a single structure there. 4 years after the fact, they've all been demolished, and there's not even a hole dug in the ground for a foundation. It is a sanctuary for feral cats, wild birds, and vagabonds. There's nothing there.
My second question, apparently you know Mrs. Kelo quite well by now.
Yeah.
Do you think if Pfizer and the city had come to her hat in hand and said, we have a vision for this area, it will be good for the city, it will be good for your neighbors, we're going to treat them right, and they humbly asked her to enter into a free market arrangement, free market deal, do you think she would have considered it?
Maybe, but I'd ask it a different way. Here's the question that I think is more realistic. And I don't mean to be critical of that question, but I think this is a scenario that was actually on the table. Once the city and the development agency had acquired all of the properties except the 7 homes that were the people in the court case. So of 90 acres they wanted, they had 87.3 or something. There was less than 3 acres left to get. Okay, they've got the titles to everything else, and they've actually cleared everything else. So they've got these 7 homeowners, boom, 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 clustered in there. That's all. And the developer wants to move ahead. They got money invested. The state has spent $70 million. The city has spent money. And the developer says, okay, guys, listen, you know what? We can build the project just like you got it drawn up here. We can do the whole project with these 7 houses still here. Okay? And the city attorney, Tom Londrigan, has a decision to make. Should we put the pedal to the metal with the litigation because we know we can win? Because he's read the law. Connecticut's law is very favorable to doing this. He knows that. Or do we make a deal right now where we allow these people to stay, and in exchange for that, we get the build-out that we want in the city. We get all that tax revenue. We create 2,000 jobs and bring all these construction people. We get to do it all. And he says, no. Go forward. Get them all. So if I'm Pfizer, it's then. Here's the company that's now been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, portrayed as the big bad pharmaceutical that went in and shook down 90-year-old senior citizens on oxygen to get their houses, which isn't really fair because that's not really what they did. But they've been portrayed that way. Okay, you're dealing with that problem. So my question would be this way. Why wouldn't Pfizer go over there and say, hey, you know what? We're a big stakeholder in this too. We got the $300 million project right next door. We want you to do that project over there with the 87 acres, and we'd be happy to have these people as our neighbors. In fact, we'll spend $500,000 per house. 7 houses, we'll spend $500,000 per house to redo the facades and the yards and the driveways on all of them so they look historic, to match the rest of the development. How about that? Project goes away. What does Pfizer get? They get millions and millions of dollars of PR. They're good corporate partners. The homeowners stay. The city gets its plan. And today, if you went down there, you'd see a 5-star hotel, biomedical research space, new upscale housing, and you'd see a pink house with 6 neighbors and everybody be happy. But that's not what they did. What do I know? I mean, I'm just a writer, but I mean, you think about this stuff and you go, why don't smart people do stuff like that? And it's all about, I said this in the only opinion I put in this book is in the prologue, where I said, to me, this story comes down to one word, and it's such a powerful word in America, in humanity. It's pride. P-R-I-D-E. And pride can be a wonderful quality in a human being, or it can be the pathway to disaster. Now, I think Susette Kelo had a lot of pride. It's the good kind of pride. That's the kind of pride that makes a person stand up for themselves, for the pride of it. Or you can have the kind of pride that I think the people on the other side had, where we are not going to be beat by these people who dare to stand up to us. And I think it cost them everything because they did. Thank you very much.